Hey, what's good, guys? Welcome to Dismantling the Narrative with Cliff. I'm Cliff. Today we're going to be looking at Mark Carney and how he's just appointing people like his friends into high places in the government, and how he's not as good as he says he is at taking care of Canada. Alright, let's get into it.
So, let's talk about Mark Carney. Is he the brilliant architect of Canada's economic future, or is he just another well-connected insider playing a game with a different set of rules? You know, that's the billion-dollar question at the heart of Canadian politics right now, and we're going to dig into it.
When you really boil it all down, it comes down to this. Are we watching a story of bold, brilliant leadership in action, or is this a classic tale of elite insiders rigging the system for themselves? The crazy part is, the answer you get really depends on who you talk to. So let's break down both sides of the argument. First up, let's look at the vision versus the reality. Because, every grand strategy, every big plan comes with a cost. So let's check out the plan itself, and then see what happens when it actually meets the real world.
Okay, so the official strategy, it's huge, no question about it. The goal is to build a much stronger, more resilient Canada. How? By diversifying trade, by fast-tracking massive projects, and by turning the country into a total magnet for global investment. On paper, it looks like a really impressive blueprint for the future.
But, and this is a big but, the reality on the ground right now has been pretty jarring for a lot of people. While the vision is all about the long term, the short term has meant things like public sector job cuts that creates a ton of anxiety. And there's this growing feeling, this perception, that the whole plan really just favors an elite network. It's leaving a lot of people asking, hey, who is this really for?
And that question leads us right into our next big point. Are the people being put in charge genuine experts, or are they just insiders? A big vision needs the right people to make it happen, but who gets chosen? This is where things get really heated. Is this about hiring the absolute best, or is it about rewarding your friends?
All right, take a look at this number. Over $577,000. Now get this, that's not a project budget. That's the reported annual salary for several people in brand new, high-level government jobs. We're talking specifically about the heads of two new, very powerful agencies, the Major Projects Office and the Defense Investment Agency. They're reportedly making more than Carney himself. And here's what's really raising red flags for critics. These top jobs and others are going to former colleagues from the world of banking and finance. The accusation is pretty simple. This looks an awful lot like cronyism. Now, to be fair, what's the official defense? Well, the argument is that these are not your typical government jobs. The thinking goes, if you want to manage multi-billion-dollar projects and really cut through all the red tape, you've got to bring in heavy hitters from the private sector. And those high salaries? They say they're just what it costs to get that kind of talent. It's all about speed and efficiency. But this whole approach opens the door to a huge risk, something experts call regulatory capture. And this is a really key concept to understand. Basically, it's when the agency that's supposed to be the public's watchdog starts serving the interests of the very industry it's supposed to be regulating. Why does that matter to you? Well, it can mean things like weaker safety rules, higher prices for all of us, and less competition. All because the watchdog is basically working for the guys it's meant to be watching.
Okay, now let's do what you always have to do in these situations. Let's follow the money. We have billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars being funneled into these massive new initiatives. So the obvious question becomes, who really stands to gain the most here?
And to really get why people are so concerned, you have to look at Carney's background. Right before he got into politics, he was the chair at Brookfield Asset Management. That's a global giant in real estate, infrastructure, and energy. The exact same sectors getting all this government attention now. Now, his assets are in a blind trust, sure, but for critics, the connections themselves are the issue.
And the amount of money we're talking about is just staggering. $13 billion for housing, $56 billion for infrastructure and energy. To put that $56 billion in perspective, that is more than the entire annual budget for Canada's public healthcare system. Just let that sink in. On top of that, there's a whole new agency for defense spending and huge tax breaks for certain industries. It's a massive shift in how public money is being spent.
So you just have to ask the question, right? When you look at where all these billions of our dollars are going, how closely does it line up with the corporate world that Carney just came from?
Well, the overlap is pretty striking. The government's new investment priorities, housing, infrastructure, and energy, are a mere image of the key sectors at Carney's old firm, Brookfield. For his critics, this is no coincidence.
it looks like a massive potential conflict of interest, suggesting public policy might be tilted to favor the networks he knows best.
Okay, so you have these competing facts. You have these huge accusations flying around. How on earth are we supposed to make sense of any of it? Well, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, decoding the media narrative. Is anyone actually telling us the whole truth about how Carney is doing?
Because, let's be honest, depending on which news channel you watch or website you read, you're getting one of two totally different stories. One side is praising the technocratic approach and the long-term vision. The other side is totally focused on cronyism, those high salaries, and the idea that this whole thing just helps elite investors. The very same actions are being framed in completely opposite ways.
So here's the real takeaway from the source material we looked at. Neither side is giving you the full picture. The media narrative is often, well, selective. Reports will show you some true things, but they tend to either downplay the conflict of interest stuff or really overhype the efficiency gains, all depending on the outlet's point of view. The actual truth seems to be way more complicated.
And that leaves all of us with the most important question of all. When you have a leader pushing a huge vision, critics pointing to what look like serious conflicts, and a media landscape telling you two contradictory stories, how do you decide who to trust? It kind of puts the ball back in our court, doesn't it? It forces us to ask, how do we cut through all that noise and figure out who really has our best interest at heart?